The telegram arrived on the hottest day of 1875. The paper crackling in Harriet Blackwell's trembling hands as she read the words that would change her life forever. Her father's message was clear and left no room for argument. She was to marry Sebastian Montgomery, the wealthy mining magnate from San Francisco, a man she had never met but whose fortune would save her family from financial ruin. "This can't be happening," Harriet whispered, sinking onto the settee in her family's modest home in Marysville, California. Her mother, Eleanor, reached for the telegram. "What does it say, dear?" Harriet could barely speak as she handed over the yellow paper. "Father has arranged a marriage for me to Sebastian Montgomery." Eleanor's face paled. "The mining investor. But he's 48 years old and a complete stranger," Harriet finished, rising from the settee to pace across the worn carpet. At 22, she had always known marriage would be expected, but she had secretly nurtured hopes of finding love like the kind she read about in novels. "Your father believes this is the only way to save us," Eleanor said softly. "The bank is threatening to take everything." Harriet glanced around their home, once grand but now showing signs of neglect. Her father's failed investments had left them teetering on the edge of ruin. The war had changed everything for families like theirs across the nation. "When is he coming?" Harriet asked, her voice hollow. "Your father returns next week with Mr. Montgomery." Eleanor folded the telegram carefully. "The wedding is to be held immediately after." Harriet turned to the window, gazing at the dusty main street of Marysville. The town had grown rapidly during the gold rush years, but now in 1875 it had settled into a steady rhythm of commerce and ranching. It was her home, the only place she'd ever known. "I'll need some air," she said suddenly, reaching for her bonnet. "Please don't worry, Mother. I'll be back before supper." The streets of Marysville bustled with afternoon activity. Carriages rolled past, kicking up dust that settled on Harriet's navy blue skirt as she walked with no particular destination in mind. She nodded politely to acquaintances but avoided conversation, her thoughts too tumultuous for small talk. Before she realized it, her feet had carried her to the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open land and scattered homesteads. In the distance, she could see riders moving cattle across the golden hills. "Whoa there, miss!" A deep voice called out, startling her from her thoughts. Harriet looked up to find herself standing directly in the path of an approaching horse and rider. The man pulled his mount to a stop just short of where she stood frozen in place. "I apologize," she said quickly, stepping aside. "I wasn't paying attention." The rider tipped his hat back, revealing sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a summer sky. "No harm done. Though it's not often ladies from town wander out this far alone." There was no judgment in his tone, merely curiosity. Harriet noticed his clothes were dusty but well-kept denim trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms, and a vest that had seen better days. A working man, not one of the town's merchants or bankers. "I needed to think," she admitted, surprising herself with her candor. He nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Thinking's better done under the open sky than indoors in my experience." He extended a hand. "Thomas Dawson." "Most folks call me Tucker." "Harriet Blackwell," she replied, briefly touching his calloused palm in greeting. "And yes, I suppose you're right about the thinking." Tucker Dawson studied her face, noting the worry in her eyes. "Something troubling you, Miss Blackwell?" Harriet hesitated. There was something about his straightforward manner that invited confidence, but she couldn't possibly explain her situation to a stranger. "Family matters," she said finally. "Nothing that can be helped." Tucker nodded, not pressing further. "Well, if you're intent on walking and thinking, might I suggest a safer route? There's a nice path along the river about a quarter-mile that way. He pointed eastward. Less chance of being trampled by distracted cowboys or their cattle. Despite herself, Harriet smiled. Thank you, Mr. Dawson. Tucker, he corrected. Mr. Dawson was my father, and he's been gone these past 5 years. Tucker, she agreed, liking the sound of it. He tipped his hat again. Pleasure meeting you, Miss Blackwell. Hope whatever's troubling you sorts itself out. With a gentle click of his tongue, he urged his horse forward, continuing toward town. Harriet watched him go, momentarily distracted from her worries by the encounter. Then, taking his advice, she turned toward the river path. The next week passed in a blur of preparations. Harriet's father returned from San Francisco with Sebastian Montgomery in tow. The older man was impeccably dressed, his silver-streaked hair and beard neatly trimmed, his manner polite but distant. He presented Harriet with an ornate engagement ring that felt impossibly heavy on her finger. You'll want for nothing as my wife, he told her during their first chaperoned meeting in the parlor. My home in San Francisco overlooks the bay. You'll be introduced to society, where the finest gowns attend the opera. Harriet nodded, her smile not reaching her eyes. It sounds lovely. What she didn't say was that she had never cared for such things. She loved books and music, quiet afternoons sketching the landscapes around Marysville, and riding horseback when her father permitted it. San Francisco, with its noise and social obligations, sounded more like a prison than a paradise. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday, just 10 days after Montgomery's arrival. Harriet watched with detachment as the town's best seamstress altered a cream-colored silk gown that had been ordered from Sacramento. You're so fortunate, the seamstress gushed as she pinned the bodice. Mr. Montgomery is one of the wealthiest men in California. Think of the life you'll have. Harriet forced another smile. Yes, I am very lucky. 3 days before the wedding, Harriet couldn't bear the confines of the house any longer. With the excuse of needing fresh air, she escaped to the stables and saddled her mare, Penny. Her mother would be scandalized if she knew Harriet was riding alone, but she needed this small freedom before it was gone forever. She rode out of town, following the river path that Tucker had recommended. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light, and for a brief moment, Harriet felt something like peace, until Penny stepped in a rabbit hole and stumbled, throwing Harriet from the saddle. She landed hard, the impact knocking the breath from her lungs. Pain shot through her ankle when she tried to stand. Easy now, came a familiar voice as Tucker Dawson rode up, dismounting quickly to kneel beside her. Are you hurt? My ankle, Harriet gasped. I think I've twisted it. Tucker gently examined her ankle, his touch careful and professional. Not broken, I don't think, but a bad sprain. You shouldn't walk on it. He glanced at Penny, who was grazing nearby, seemingly uninjured. Let me help you home. Before Harriet could protest, he'd lifted her as if she weighed nothing, placing her on his horse before retrieving Penny's reins. He mounted behind Harriet, one arm steadying her while the other held the reins of both horses. I'm making a habit of being where I shouldn't, Harriet said, acutely aware of his chest against her back. Tucker chuckled, the sound vibrating through her. And I'm making a habit of finding you. Though this time, I was headed to check fencing on the north pasture. You work on one of the ranches? Harriet asked, trying to distract herself from both the pain in her ankle and the warmth of his proximity. Own a small spread myself, he corrected. Nothing fancy, about 60 acres with a decent herd. Been building it up for the past 3 years. You're young to own your own ranch, Harriet observed. 26, and it was my uncle's land. Left it to me when he passed. Tucker's voice grew serious. I've worked cattle since I was 14, saved every penny. The land needs work, but it's mine." There was pride in his voice that touched Harriet. Here was a man who valued what he'd built with his own hands, not inherited wealth or social position. "I heard in town you're getting married," Tucker said after a moment, his tone carefully neutral. "To Sebastian Montgomery." Harriet stiffened. "News travels fast." "Small town," Tucker replied. "And Montgomery's not exactly unknown in these parts. His company owns several mines around the county." "Yes, well." Harriet didn't know what else to say. How could she explain that the marriage was a business transaction, that her father's debts had essentially sold her to the highest bidder? Tucker seemed to sense her discomfort. "Your ankle's going to need ice and rest." "Should I take you straight to the doctor?" Grateful for the change of subject, Harriet nodded. "Please, and thank you for your help." Dr. Wallace confirmed Tucker's assessment: a bad sprain that would require at least a week of rest. Harriet's mother was scandalized by her daughter's escapade but grateful to the young rancher for his assistance. Sebastian Montgomery was less understanding when he called the following day. "Riding unaccompanied," he said, his tone making the activity sound scandalous. "My dear, that's not appropriate behavior for a lady, particularly not for my future wife." Harriet sat with her injured ankle elevated, feeling like a scolded child. "I've been riding since childhood, Mr. Montgomery." "Sebastian, please," he corrected. "And while such country pastimes may have been acceptable here in San Francisco, you'll have different obligations. I entertain important business associates, government officials. My wife must be above reproach." The walls seemed to close in around Harriet. This was to be her life constrained by the expectations of a man who saw her as an accessory to his success. "The doctor says I should stay off my ankle for at least a week," she said quietly. Montgomery frowned. "That would delay the wedding." "I'm afraid so." He checked his pocket watch. "Inconvenient, but manageable. I'll postpone my return to San Francisco and reschedule the ceremony for 2 weeks from now." He spoke as if adjusting a business meeting with no consideration for her feelings. After he left, Harriet hobbled to the window, staring out at the streets of Marysville. The thought of leaving her home for a loveless marriage in a strange city made her chest tight with panic. That evening, a package arrived for Harriet, a small, leather-bound book of poetry with a simple note. "For thinking indoors when you can't be under the open sky. Best wishes for a quick recovery. T.D." Harriet traced her fingers over Tucker's initials, surprised and touched by the gesture. She opened the book to find it was a collection by Walt Whitman, the pages well-read but carefully preserved. "Who sent this?" her mother asked, peering over her shoulder. "Mr. Dawson, the rancher who helped me yesterday," Harriet replied, unable to keep the warmth from her voice. Her mother's expression softened. "That was thoughtful of him." Harriet nodded, opening to a random page and reading the first lines that caught her eye. "I am large. I contain multitudes." The words resonated with something inside her, a reminder that she was more than just a solution to her family's financial problems. The forced rest gave Harriet too much time to think. She read Tucker's book from cover to cover, finding solace in Whitman's celebration of individual freedom and the beauty of ordinary life. By contrast, each visit from Sebastian Montgomery felt like another link in a chain binding her to a future she dreaded. 5 days after her accident, Tucker Dawson appeared at the Blackwell home, hat in hand, asking after Harriet's health. Eleanor Blackwell, impressed by his manners despite his working-class status, invited him into the parlor where Harriet was reading. "Mr. Dawson," Harriet said, unable to hide her pleasure at seeing him. "What a surprise." Tucker smiled, and Harriet noticed how it transformed his serious face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "I was in town for supplies and thought I'd check on your recovery." He glanced at her ankle, still wrapped but no longer elevated. "Looks like you're on the mend." "Much better, thank you." She held up the book. "And thank you for this. It's been wonderful company during my confinement." "Glad to hear it," Tucker replied. "Whitman has a way of making even the simplest things seem important." They fell into easy conversation about books and poetry, discovering a shared appreciation for literature that surprised them both. Alina excused herself to prepare tea, leaving them alone. "I never expected a rancher to quote poetry," Harriet admitted. Tucker laughed. "My mother was a school teacher before she married. Our home had more books than furniture. She taught me to read before I could ride." "She sounds wonderful." "She was," Tucker said, a shadow crossing his face. "Lost her in '68 to fever." "I'm sorry," Harriet said softly. She hesitated before adding, "Your father, too, you mentioned." Tucker nodded. "Trail accident. Cattle drive to Sacramento turned ugly when a storm spooked the herd." Harriet felt a connection to this man who had faced loss yet maintained such quiet strength. It made her own situation seem both more manageable and more tragic. Manageable because others had endured worse. Tragic because she was surrendering to a fate she could perhaps avoid. "I should be going," Tucker said, rising as Alina returned with tea. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Blackwell. Miss Blackwell, I'm pleased to see you recovering." "Won't you stay for tea, Mr. Dawson?" Alina asked. "Another time, perhaps. I've cattle waiting." He tipped his hat. "Good day, ladies." After he left, Alina studied her daughter thoughtfully. "He seems a decent sort." "Not at all what I expected from the way people speak of him." "What do you mean?" Harriet asked, surprised. "Oh, there's talk that he keeps to himself, works twice as hard as any man in the county." She poured the tea. "Some find it odd, a young man so serious and solitary." "Perhaps he's simply focused on building his ranch," Harriet suggested. "Perhaps," Alina agreed. "Still, he went out of his way to bring you that book and to check on you today." Harriet felt her cheeks warm. He was being neighborly. "If you say so, dear." Alina's tone suggested she thought otherwise. That night, Harriet lay awake, comparing Tucker Dawson's genuine warmth with Sebastian Montgomery's cool propriety. One man saw her as a person with thoughts and interests. The other saw a suitable accessory for his position. The contrast was stark and painful. The following day, Sebastian Montgomery called again, bringing an elaborate arrangement of hothouse flowers that seemed ostentatious in the Blackwells' modest parlor. "I've spoken with Reverend Phillips," he announced. "The wedding is set for Saturday next." "The invitations have been amended." Harriet glanced at her ankle. "Dr. Wallace hasn't cleared me to walk without support." "You'll manage for the ceremony," Montgomery said dismissively. "And afterward, we'll depart immediately for San Francisco." "I've already been away from my business concerns too long." His words confirmed what Harriet had begun to suspect in his eyes. She was simply another acquisition, a transaction to be completed efficiently before returning to matters of real importance. "I've been thinking," Harriet said carefully. "Perhaps we should take more time to become acquainted before the wedding. After all, marriage is a significant step." Montgomery's eyebrows rose. "Your father and I have already finalized the arrangements, my dear. The marriage settlement is quite generous, considering your family's situation." The blunt reminder of her status as a commodity made Harriet flinch. "Yes, of course," she murmured, chastised. After Montgomery left, Harriet found her father in his study reviewing papers with a furrowed brow. "Father," she began, closing the door behind her, "I need to speak with you about this marriage." George Blackwell looked up, his once handsome face now lined with worry. "What about it?" "I don't love him," Harriet said simply. Her father sighed. "Love is a luxury we cannot afford, Harriet." Montgomery's marriage settlement will clear all our debts and secure your mother's future. Without it, we lose everything: the house, our standing in the community, everything. But to marry a man old enough to be my father, someone I barely know, many women make suitable matches with older, established men," her father interrupted. "Montgomery can give you a life I never could. Security, position, comfort." "What about happiness?" Harriet asked quietly. Her father's expression softened slightly. "Happiness comes in many forms, daughter. Sometimes it's found in doing one's duty." He reached for her hand. "Please, Harriet, I wouldn't ask this if there was any other way." Harriet saw the defeat in her father's eyes, the weight of failure pressing down on his shoulders. How could she add to his burden? And yet, how could she sacrifice her entire future? That night, Harriet made a decision. Taking paper and pen, she wrote a letter, her hand shaking but determined. When she finished, she sealed it and placed it on her dressing table before slipping into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, she rose early, dressed in her simplest skirt and blouse, and packed a small valise with essentials. Her ankle was still tender but supportable with a bandage and careful walking. She left the letter propped against her pillow, took what little money she had saved, and slipped out of the house before dawn. Marysville was quiet as Harriet made her way to the livery stable where Penny was kept. The stableman wasn't yet on duty, allowing her to saddle her mare without questions. As the first light of day touched the eastern horizon, Harriet Blackwell rode out of town, heading north along the river path. She had only a vague plan to reach Tucker Dawson's ranch and ask for his help. Not to run away permanently, but for time to think, to find another solution besides selling herself into a loveless marriage. Tucker struck her as honorable, someone who might understand her desperate situation. The morning grew warm as Harriet rode. Her injured ankle throbbed, but determination pushed her forward. She had never traveled to Tucker's ranch, knowing only that it lay several miles north of town. By mid-morning, she was beginning to worry she'd missed the turn, when she spotted a weathered sign reading Dawson Ranch, marking a narrow track leading west from the main trail. The path led her to a modest homestead, nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills. A small, well-maintained cabin stood surrounded by several outbuildings. In the distance, cattle grazed in fenced pastures. It wasn't grand, but everything about it spoke of care and hard work. As Harriet approached, Tucker emerged from the barn, freezing in place when he recognized her. He strode quickly to meet her, concern evident in his expression. "Miss Blackwell, are you all right?" He reached up to help her dismount, his hand steady on her waist. Harriet winced as her weight settled on her tender ankle. "I'm sorry to arrive unannounced," she said, suddenly uncertain of her impulsive plan. Tucker's gaze took in her travel-worn appearance and the small valise tied to her saddle. "You're running," he said, not a question but a statement of fact. Harriet nodded, her composure finally cracking. "I left a letter explaining. I just couldn't." To her mortification, tears welled in her eyes. Tucker glanced toward town, then back at Harriet. "Come inside," he said quietly. "Whatever's happened, you shouldn't be standing in this heat." The interior of Tucker's cabin was simple but surprisingly comfortable. Bookshelves lined one wall, just as he described, filled with well-worn volumes. A desk by the window held papers and what looked like ledgers. The furniture was sturdy and practical, with a few handmade touches that suggested Tucker had crafted some pieces himself. He pulled out a chair for Harriet at the kitchen table, then poured her a glass of water from a pitcher. "Drink this, then tell me what's going on." Harriet sipped the cool water gratefully. "I couldn't go through with the wedding," she said finally, "not without at least trying to find another way." Tucker sat across from her, his expression serious. "Your family will be worried. I left a letter." I explained that I needed time to think, that I wasn't disappearing forever. Harriet twisted her hands in her lap. I know it seems dramatic, but you don't understand what it's like to be treated as property, to be handed over to pay debts. Tucker's jaw tightened. Actually, I understand more than you might think. He hesitated, then continued. My mother was in a similar position after my father died. A wealthy merchant offered to clear her debts in exchange for marriage. She refused, chose to struggle rather than sell herself. It wasn't easy, but she never regretted maintaining her independence. Harriet felt a surge of kinship with Tucker's mother. What happened to her? Worked herself to exhaustion, he said simply. The fever might not have taken her if she hadn't been so weakened already. The implications of his story weren't lost on Harriet. His mother had chosen freedom over security and paid with her life. I don't know what to do, Harriet admitted. If I refuse Montgomery, my family loses everything. If I marry him, I lose myself. Tucker was silent for a long moment. You can stay here today, he finally said. Rest, think. But by tomorrow you need to make a decision. Either return to Marysville and face your situation, or, Harriet prompted when he didn't continue. Tucker met her eyes directly. Or be prepared to truly leave. Not just your town, but California altogether. Start fresh somewhere no one knows you. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Could someone really do that? Just disappear and begin again? People do it every day out here, Tucker said. The West is full of men and women reinventing themselves. But it's not easy, especially not for a woman alone. Harriet nodded slowly. I understand, and thank you for not simply taking me straight back to town. Tucker's expression softened. I believe in a person's right to choose their own path, Miss Blackwell, even if that choice comes with consequences. He showed her to a small bedroom, his mother's. He explained where she could rest. The room had been preserved with obvious care, simple but feminine touches still evident in the faded quilt and curtains. Harriet lay down, her exhaustion catching up with her. As she drifted to sleep, she realized she felt safer in this stranger's home than she had in her own these past weeks. She woke to the sound of horses approaching. Alarmed, she rose quickly and went to the window, relieved when she saw it was only Tucker returning with a small herd of cattle. She watched him work, impressed by his skill as he directed the animals into a pen with minimal fuss. When she emerged from the bedroom, Tucker was washing up at the kitchen pump. Sleep well? He asked, drying his hands on a towel. Yes, thank you. Harriet noticed he'd removed his vest and rolled up his sleeves in the afternoon heat, revealing strong forearms tanned by the sun. She quickly averted her eyes. Can I help with anything? Tucker smiled. Hungry, I was about to start supper. Together they prepared a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee. Harriet found herself enjoying the domestic task, so different from the formal dining she was accustomed to at home. You cook well for a bachelor, she observed as they sat down to eat. Necessity, Tucker replied with a shrug. Can't work cattle all day on an empty stomach. As they ate, Tucker told Harriet about his ranch, his plans for expansion, the breeding stock he was developing, his hopes for eventually building a larger house. His passion for the land and his work was evident in every word. You love it here, Harriet said, not a question but a realization. Tucker nodded. It's not an easy life, but it's mine. Every improvement, every successful season, I've earned it all myself. That must be satisfying, Harriet mused, to know you've built something with your own hands. It is. Tucker studied her across the table. What about you? What would you choose if you could choose anything? The question caught Harriet off guard. No one had ever asked what she wanted. I'm not sure, she admitted. I've always loved books, art. I thought perhaps I might teach someday. You'd make a fine teacher, Tucker said. his tone matter-of-fact rather than flattering. "My father would say that's not a suitable occupation for a lady of my standing," Harriet said with a touch of bitterness. "Though apparently, marrying a man 3 decades my senior is perfectly acceptable." Tucker set down his coffee cup. "Your father is trying to protect you the only way he knows how. By selling me." The words came out sharper than Harriet intended. "By securing your future," Tucker corrected gently. "The world isn't kind to women without means or protection." "He sees Montgomery as your best chance at security." "You sound like you're defending him," Harriet said, surprised. Tucker shook his head. "Understanding someone's motivations isn't the same as agreeing with their methods." He rose to clear their plates. "The question is, what are you willing to risk for the chance at a different life?" As darkness fell, they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the stars appear. The night was peaceful, crickets chirping in the grass, a cool breeze providing relief from the day's heat. "I should return tomorrow," Harriet said finally. "My parents will be frantic and running away solves nothing." Tucker nodded. "I'll ride with you, make sure you get back safely." "Thank you." Harriet hesitated, then added, "Not just for that, but for today, for listening without judgment." Tucker turned to look at her, his face half shadowed in the lantern light. "You deserve better than to be bartered away, Harriet Blackwell. Don't forget that, whatever you decide." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in his tone made Harriet's heart beat faster. There was respect in his eyes and something more, admiration, perhaps, or understanding. That night, lying in Tucker's mother's bed, Harriet made her decision. She would return to Marysville, but not to surrender. She would find another way to help her family without sacrificing her future to a loveless marriage. Morning came too quickly. Harriet joined Tucker for a breakfast of coffee and leftover cornbread before they saddled the horses for the ride back to town. "Ready?" Tucker asked as he helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "As I'll ever be," Harriet replied, squaring her shoulders. They rode mostly in silence, each lost in thought. As they approached Marysville, Tucker finally spoke. "Whatever happens, remember you have options. There's always another path." "Even if it's not an easy one?" Harriet asked. "Especially then," Tucker said with a small smile. "The worthwhile paths rarely are." They were spotted as soon as they reached the outskirts of town. A young boy recognized Harriet and ran ahead, presumably to spread the news of her return. By the time they reached the Blackwell home, both her parents were waiting anxiously on the porch. Alina rushed forward as Harriet dismounted. "Oh, thank God, we've been out of our minds with worry." George Blackwell's expression was a mix of relief and anger. His gaze shifted from his daughter to Tucker, hardening with suspicion. "What's the meaning of this, young man? Where have you taken my daughter?" "Father, please," Harriet intervened. "Mr. Dawson has done nothing wrong. I went to his ranch of my own accord. Alone, unchaperoned." Her father's voice rose. "Do you have any idea of the scandal this will cause? What Montgomery will think?" Tucker dismounted, standing tall despite George Blackwell's accusations. "Sir, your daughter was distressed and needed a safe place to gather her thoughts. I provided that, nothing more. I've brought her home unharmed as any gentleman would." "Gentleman?" George scoffed. "A cowboy with a patch of scrubland presumes to call himself a gentleman, father." Harriet was mortified by his rudeness. "Mr. Dawson has been nothing but honorable. Please don't inside, Harriet," her father cut her off. "Now, we have damage to control before Montgomery learns of this indiscretion." Harriet turned to Tucker, apology in her eyes. "Thank you for everything." Tucker tipped his hat, his expression carefully neutral. "Madam." With a final nod to her parents, he mounted his horse and rode away. Inside the house, George Blackwell paced the parlor. "Have you any idea what you've done? Montgomery could call off the wedding. We could lose everything. I'm sorry for worrying you, Harriet said calmly. But I'm not sorry I went. I needed time to think. Think about what? Her father demanded. Your duty is clear. My duty to myself is also clear, Harriet replied, finding strength she hadn't known she possessed. I cannot marry Sebastian Montgomery. Her father stopped pacing, his face paling. You can and you will. The arrangements are made. Then unmake them, Harriet said simply. Tell him I'm unsuitable. Tell him I've compromised myself with a rancher if you must. Harriet, her mother gasped. Nothing improper happened, Harriet clarified. But if that's what it takes to end this engagement, so be it. George collapsed into a chair. You would ruin us all. For what? Some romantic notion of love. For the right to choose my own future, Harriet corrected. There must be another way to resolve our financial troubles. Sell some land or let me find work. Work. Her father looked aghast. A Blackwell woman in service. Not in service. Teaching, perhaps, or a knock at the door interrupted her. Alina went to answer it, returning moments later with a grim expression. Sebastian Montgomery is here. He's heard about Harriet's adventure. Montgomery entered without waiting for an invitation, his face thunderous. Is it true? He demanded, looking directly at Harriet. You spent the night at Tucker Dawson's ranch. Harriet lifted her chin. I did. I needed time away to consider our engagement. Consider? Montgomery's voice was dangerously quiet. There is nothing to consider. The contracts are signed. Contracts can be broken, Harriet replied evenly. Montgomery turned to George. Control your daughter, sir, or the deal is off. I won't be made a fool of by a willful girl and a penniless cowboy. Sebastian, please, George began. Harriet was confused, emotional. I was neither, Harriet interrupted. I was and am perfectly clear about my feelings. I cannot marry you, Mr. Montgomery. A tense silence filled the room. Finally, Montgomery spoke, his voice cold. Very well. Consider our arrangement terminated. He turned to George. I expect full repayment of the advance I provided with interest within 30 days. Otherwise, I'll be forced to take possession of this house and all assets as collateral. With that, he strode out, leaving the Blackwells in stunned silence. What have you done? George whispered, his face ashen. Harriet felt simultaneously terrified and liberated. What I had to do. The next few days were grim in the Blackwell household. George retreated to his study, desperately trying to find a way to raise the money needed to repay Montgomery. Alina alternated between tears and tense silence. Harriet, feeling responsible for the crisis but not regretful of her decision, tried to make herself useful while considering her options. The solution came from an unexpected quarter. 3 days after Montgomery's departure, Tucker Dawson appeared at their door, dressed in his best clothes, requesting a private meeting with George Blackwell. The meeting lasted over an hour. When Tucker finally emerged from the study, he nodded briefly to Harriet before leaving. Her father called her in immediately. Sit down, Harriet, George said, his expression unreadable. Harriet obeyed, her stomach knotting with anxiety. What did Mr. Dawson want? Her father studied her face. He came with a business proposition and a personal one. I don't understand. George sighed. He's offered to loan me enough money to repay Montgomery, using his ranch as collateral. In exchange, I would sell him the northern tract of our land, the parcel adjoining his property. Harriet was stunned. But that would put him at considerable risk. Why would he do that? For you, her father said simply. He's also asked for permission to court you properly this time. Harriet felt her face flush. What? It seems your cowboy has more substance than I gave him credit for, George admitted. He's been saving to expand his ranch for years. This opportunity would give him the additional acreage he needs. while solving our immediate problem with Montgomery. And his other request? Harriet asked, hardly daring to hope. I told him that would be for you to decide. George leaned forward. Harriet, I won't pretend to understand what's between you two, but he's willing to risk everything he's built to help our family to help you. That speaks to his character. Harriet could hardly believe what she was hearing. You wouldn't object to Tucker courting me? He's not what I envisioned for you, George admitted, but he's a man of integrity, self-made, hard-working. He paused, and he clearly cares for you deeply. Where is he now? Harriet asked, rising. Said he was heading to the bank, then back to his ranch. George watched his daughter carefully. What will you tell him? Harriet smiled, feeling truly hopeful for the first time in weeks. I'll tell him yes to both his propositions. Her father nodded slowly. Then go with my blessing. Harriet didn't need to be told twice. Grabbing her bonnet, she hurried out, hoping to catch Tucker before he left town. Her ankle was almost healed, allowing her to move quickly through the streets of Marysville. She spotted him outside the bank, just mounting his horse. Tucker, she called, not caring about the curious looks from passers-by. He turned, surprise giving way to a cautious smile as he dismounted. Miss Blackwell. Harriet reached him, slightly out of breath. My father told me about your offer. Tucker's expression grew serious. All of it. All of it, she confirmed, her heart pounding. The business arrangement and the personal one. I know it's forward, Tucker said, his voice low. We barely know each other, but these past days I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, your courage, your determination. Harriet felt a blush warming her cheeks. I've been thinking about you too. Tucker took a step closer. I can't offer you the life Montgomery could. No mansion in San Francisco, no society parties. Just a small ranch, hard work, and whatever we might build together. That sounds like everything I could want, Harriet said softly. Tucker's eyes searched hers. You mean that? I do. Harriet took a deep breath. Yes to the land deal, Tucker, and yes to your courtship. The smile that spread across Tucker's face made Harriet's heart skip a beat. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her right there on the street, but he merely took her hand, squeezing it gently. I'll call on you properly tomorrow evening, he said. If that's agreeable, Harriet nodded, reluctant to let go of his hand. I'll look forward to it. Over the next month, Tucker called on Harriet 3 times a week, always properly chaperoned by her mother. They spoke of books and poetry, of his plans for the expanded ranch, of her dreams of perhaps starting a small school for the children of ranch workers who had limited access to education. By the end of that month, the land deal was complete. Tucker's loan had saved the Blackwells from ruin, and he had gained the acreage he needed to expand his operation. Sebastian Montgomery, upon being repaid in full, returned to San Francisco without further comment. On a warm evening in late summer, Tucker took Harriet for a walk along the river path where they had first met. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, he stopped and turned to her. Harriet Blackwell, he said, taking both her hands in his. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life. Harriet smiled up at him. Mine too. I know our courtship has been brief, Tucker continued, but I've never been more certain of anything. He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. I love you, Harriet. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Harriet felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. Yes, Tucker. Yes, I will. He rose, pulling her gently into his arms and kissing her for the first time, a tender, reverent kiss that held all the promise of their future together. They were married in October, with the autumn colors painting the landscape around Marysville in rich golds and reds. The ceremony was simple but beautiful, held in the town's small church with family and a few close friends in attendance. Harriet wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slender frame, and carried wildflowers Tucker had gathered that morning. After the ceremony, they rode together to what was now their ranch, expanded by the addition of the Blackwell land. Tucker had spent weeks preparing for Harriet's arrival, adding feminine touches to the cabin and beginning construction on a larger house they would build together over time. That night, as they stood on the porch of their cabin under a canopy of stars, Tucker wrapped his arms around his bride from behind. "Are you happy, Mrs. Dawson?" Harriet leaned back against his chest, savoring the strength and warmth of him. "Happier than I ever imagined possible. No regrets." "About giving up a grander life?" She turned in his arms to face him. "This is the life I choose, Tucker. With you, it's worth more than all the mansions in San Francisco." His kiss was tender at first, then deepening with passion as he lifted her into his arms and carried her across the threshold of their home. The years that followed brought challenges, as all lives do, but also deep joy. Tucker's ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Harriet established a small school for the children of neighboring ranchers, finding fulfillment in teaching that no society position could have provided. In their second year of marriage, their first child was born, a son they named James, after Tucker's father. He was joined 2 years later by a daughter, Eleanor, named for Harriet's mother. Through it all, Harriet never regretted her decision to follow her heart rather than her father's plans. The simple life she built with Tucker was rich in ways money could never measure in love, purpose, and the freedom to shape their own destiny together. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of the new house they had finally completed, watching their children play in the yard, Tucker took Harriet's hand. "Remember when I found you wandering by the river path that first day?" Harriet smiled at the memory. "I was so lost in my thoughts, I nearly got trampled." "I knew then you were special," Tucker admitted, "though I never imagined you'd become my wife. And I never imagined a chance encounter with a cowboy would change my life completely." Harriet leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for offering me a choice when everyone else was taking it away." Tucker kissed her softly. "Thank you for being brave enough to take it." As the sun set over the rolling hills of their ranch, Harriet Dawson reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been ordered to marry for money, not love, but had found the courage to choose a different path. In Tucker, she had found not just love, but a true partner who valued her mind and spirit as much as her heart. The simple life they had built together was more precious than all the wealth Sebastian Montgomery could have provided because it was theirs, shaped by their own hands, hearts, and choices. Sometimes, Harriet thought, the greatest riches come disguised as the simplest offerings. For her, it had been a cowboy's hand, extended in friendship and later in love, offering not luxury or status, but something far more valuable: the chance to build a life together, one day at a time, bound by love and mutual respect. And that, she knew with absolute certainty, was worth more than all the gold in California. 10 years into their marriage, the Dawson Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the region. Tucker's innovative breeding methods and Harriet's skilled management of their finances had allowed them to weather even the difficult seasons that plagued other ranchers. Their family had grown as well, with the addition of a third child, another son they named William, who had his father's serious nature and his mother's love of books. Harriet's small school had expanded, becoming an official schoolhouse serving children from miles around. Her reputation as an educator had spread, earning her the respect of the community that had once looked askance at her decision to marry a simple rancher rather than a wealthy businessman. George and Eleanor Blackwell, initially skeptical of their daughter's choice, had become frequent visitors to the ranch. George, in particular, had developed a grudging admiration for Tucker's business acumen and work ethic. The financial crisis that had nearly ruined the Blackwells had ultimately led to new opportunities, as George partnered with Tucker on several successful ventures. "What are you smiling about?" Tucker asked, noticing her expression. "Just counting my blessings," Harriet replied. Later, after the children were asleep, Tucker and Harriet sat together on the porch swing he had built as a 5th anniversary present. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "I had a letter from San Francisco today," Harriet said, nestling against Tucker's side. "Oh," he wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "From whom?" "Surprisingly, from Sebastian Montgomery's sister," Harriet explained. "Apparently he passed away last month. Heart failure." Tucker was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry to hear that. Despite everything, he was just a man trying to make his way in the world." Harriet nodded, always touched by Tucker's capacity for understanding. "His sister wrote that he never married. Threw himself into his business instead, became even wealthier, but died alone." Tucker tightened his arm around her. "Makes you think, doesn't it, about the different kinds of riches a person can have?" "It does," Harriet agreed, looking up at the home they had built together, a home filled with love, laughter, and the sweet chaos of family life. "I think we made the right choice, Mr. Dawson." Tucker kissed the top of her head. "The very best choice, Mrs. Dawson, every single day." As they sat together under the stars, Harriet reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What had seemed like the end of her hopes, being ordered to marry for money, not love, had actually been the beginning of something far more precious. By finding the courage to refuse a loveless marriage, she had opened the door to true happiness with a man who offered not wealth or status, but something infinitely more valuable: love and a simple life built together, day by day, choice by choice. And as Tucker's hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining as naturally as they had for the past decade, Harriet knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choice again, 1,000 times over, if given the chance. For in Tucker's love, she had found her true fortune, one that no amount of money could ever buy.